This is a review of our study guide for transformations, so please follow along in your study guide and make any corrections as needed. So in number 1, it asked us to sketch the image of the shape translated 3 units left and 2 units down. So if you recall, translating reminds us that we need to slide a shape. The SL in the middle looks like SL for slide. So we take each point on our shape and we count 3 units to the left and 2 units down. So starting with point E, 3 spaces to the left and 2 down, gets us at -1, 7, and that's labeled as E prime. And then point F, 3 units to the left and 2 units down, point F prime will be at 1, 7. Point H, 3 units to the left and 2 down will be at -1, 1 for H prime, and G prime will be at 1, 1. So your final new shape is created once you connect each of these points that you've just moved. It should look like the same size as your original, and it shouldn't have changed directions at all. So you have the shape that was just slid across the coordinate grid. As we move into number 2, it asked us to sketch the image of a reflection across the y-axis and then reflected across the x-axis. So the first thing we have to do is cross the y-axis with this shape. So point A right now is at -6, 3. We're crossing over the y-axis, which, as you remember, is the vertical axis. So I have to figure out it's 6 spaces away from the y-axis. So I go 6 spaces on the other side of the y-axis for my new point. So that means point A prime is at 6, 3. Then for point B, it's 6 spaces away from my y-axis. So I have to go 6 spaces to the right. Point C is 3 spaces away, so I go 3 spaces to the right. So all we're doing is making sure that each of those points is crossing over the line that we're reflecting over. So far I've reflected each of these points across the y-axis. But then the rest of my question said, then reflect across the x-axis. So you need to go ahead and reflect these points that you just made over the x-axis before we have our final shape. So A prime was at 6, 3. We have to go 3 spaces down to get to the x-axis. And so then we have to go 3 spaces below the x-axis to reflect point A. Since it's now been reflected twice, it's called A double prime. Point B is 1 above the x-axis, so we have to go 1 below the x-axis for B double prime. C is 1 above the x-axis, so we go 1 below it. So C double prime is right here. And to get our final shape, we just have to connect our dots. And now we can see that first we reflected it across y, and now we've reflected across x, and this is our final shape. In number 3, it says, if triangle DEF has vertex f at -2, 1, what will the coordinate f prime be after it is reflected across the x-axis? So something that's helpful here is to use a coordinate grid. So when you're taking your quiz, you can use one of the whiteboards with an expo marker, or you can use one of the grids that's already printed on your test. So I'm going to use the grid from number 4 to help me do this. So the point that we're talking about, or the vertex, that's just the corner on the shape, is -2, 1. And that's this point right here. I'm going to draw it on number 4's graph. It says we're going to reflect across the x-axis. Our x-axis is our horizontal axis, and we have to go 1 space down to get to it, which means we're going to be 1 space below to reflect that point. The new coordinates of that point are -2, -1. So our answer here is -2, -1. So for something like that, definitely use a grid either on the test or on a separate piece of paper or on a separate whiteboard to help you answer it. In number 4, it says select the best description of the transformation shown on the grid. So they give us 2 shapes on this grid. So our pre-image is our image that comes, or our shape that comes first, and we know this is the pre-image because it's just plain letters. There's no markings on them. This one down here is our image that comes second after you've done a transformation, and we know this is the image because it has the prime on each letter. So we have to figure out, well, what happened to this shape to get to this one? We already can tell that we didn't just slide this shape, because when we started with this one, if I just translated it and slid it down here, then A would still be facing to the left. But when we see our A prime is now facing to the right. So somehow our shape flipped. That means we can totally eliminate answer choice A because it just said it was translated 4 to the right and 10 down. We know that somehow our shape flipped, so there's going to need to be a reflection somewhere. So that means we can consider B, C, and D as our options. So I'm going to start with option B, and it said it was reflected over the y-axis and then translated 10 units down. So we have to do two things to get to this. So we'll see if it matches. If I start with point A, the first thing I need to do is reflect across the y. It is 7 spaces from the y-axis, so I have to go 7 spaces in the other direction. And then B is 2 spaces from the y-axis, so I have to go 2 over here. This is A prime, B prime, C prime. And then 1, 2 spaces from the y-axis, so 2 on the other side. So that just took care of my reflection. So I did that over the y-axis. Now it says we have to translate it 10 units down. So from each of these points that I just reflected, I need to count 10 units down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that matches with A prime where it should have been. So far it looks like it might work. We have to check each of these to verify that we actually are moving 10 spaces down for each of these points. Because if even just one point doesn't work, then it won't be true. It looks like when we counted down from each of those that we had exactly 10 units down. So this worked for both of those to end up on shape A prime, B prime, C prime like we thought. So this is our true answer. If you wanted to, you could test out the others, but once you find one that works for all 3 points, you can know that that's your answer. So we move into number 5. It says the figure shown is reflected across the y-axis. What are the coordinates of its image? So the figure here is our pre-image, and we know that because it just has plain letters. Some people have been getting confused because it said it is reflected. You still have to reflect it before you can answer this question. So you still have the pre-image. You don't have an image until you have P prime. So you can't just choose the points that are already on this triangle. We need to actually do the reflection. So for point P, it's at -3, 4. It's 3 spaces from the y-axis, so I'm going to go 3 spaces on the other side. Now it's crossed over the y-axis, so we reflected, and P prime is at 3, 4. So 3, 4 looks like it's going to be this one. Point Q was at -3, 9. I have to go 3 spaces to my y-axis, so 3 spaces the other way. Q prime is at 3, 9. That looks good. And then for R prime, it's a little bit different than how P and Q were. They were both to the left of the y-axis, so we had to move them to the right of the y-axis. R is already starting on the right of the y-axis, so in order to reflect it across the y-axis, we need to take it to the left. It's 1 space from the y-axis, so I need to go 1 space to the left, and my new point for R prime is going to be -1, 9. So it looks like all those points in option C work for our new shape, and that is our answer. As we move to number 6, it tells us the figure shown is translated 2 units left and 4 units up. Circle all of the true statements. So before you go circling answers here, make sure you actually perform the translation of this shape on your grid. So from each corner or each vertex, we need to move 2 units to the left and 4 units up. So when we do that, we'll get our new points because one of these questions asks you for the new points. So you actually have to perform the translation here. So once we do that for each of our 4 points on this rectangle, we'll get our new shape. And it's called E prime, F prime, G prime, H prime. So here's our new rectangle. Now, the first statement says E prime, F prime is 2 units long. So to find that, it's talking about a side. So we're looking for a side of our shape. E prime is right here, F prime is here. So they're talking about this side of our figure. It is 2 boxes long, so 2 units long is true. That's one of our true statements. Number 2, or the next statement, just says EFG is congruent to E prime, F prime, G prime, H prime. And to verify that, you could count the boxes on both sides of these rectangles. So 2 and 2, 2 and 2. So those look like they're good. These ones each have 10, and so does this. So 2 by 10, 2 by 10, that means that those 2 rectangles are congruent. We also only talked about transformations that keep shapes congruent. So in a translation and in a reflection, you're going to end up with our shapes being congruent. So that should always be something that we're looking for here. Now in our final 2 choices, we have 2 sets of points that are listed for E prime, F prime, G prime, H prime. The first one is the one that we want because 5, 2 is at 5, 2. That's E prime right here. 5, 0 is 5 on the x, 0 on the y right here for f prime. Negative 5, 0 is right here for g prime, and negative 5, negative 2 is right here. So that one's true. And then right away, if you look at your next choice, we already said that e prime was at 5, 2, so it can't be at 5, negative 2. So this last one is not true. In number 7, it says the figure is reflected over the x-axis, so which represents the new coordinate. So again, they're saying it is reflected, but we still have to reflect it. This is only our pre-image because we have a, b, c. To get our image, we need a prime, b prime, c prime. So we still have to reflect. Point A is at negative 3, 4. I'm reflecting across the x-axis here, so I need to count 4 units down to get to my x-axis. It was above it, so now my point A prime needs to be below the x-axis. Point B is above the x-axis at 0, 6. So to reflect, it's going to be 6 below the x-axis at 0, negative 6. Point C is at 2, 1. It's above the x-axis, so it's going to be below at 2, negative 1, right here. So that's my new shape. And my first point, A prime, was at negative 3, negative 4, which is right here. None of our other options have that. We'll double check. 0, negative 6 was B prime, and 2, negative 1 is C prime right there. So those all worked. A is the best answer choice there. And finally, number 8, it tells us if triangle ABC is translated 4 units up, which best represents the coordinates of the new figure. So we need to take this and we need to translate it 4 units up. So take each of your points, count 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes up. A prime is at negative 2, 3. That's A. Doesn't look like any of the other ones have that option, but we will check the rest of the points. 4 boxes up from here, B prime is at 2, 6. That looks good. And then C, 4 boxes up, is right here at 4, 3, and that's what is listed. So answer choice A was the best choice. So make sure as you're taking your quiz, you are carefully drawing each of your points. Go from vertex to vertex. Don't just shift the whole shape in one foul swoop. Make sure you're being careful with it. Use the coordinate grid to help you with problems where you don't have a picture, and take your time. Good luck.